Thanks for having us here. It's my first time at Florida Drupal Camp, so it's nice that I can be here. My name is Shawn DeArmond. I supervise the web development unit in information and educational technology at UC Davis. That's what we call our central IT unit. I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Mark Miller.
Hello.
He's a developer on my team and one of the great masterminds behind SiteFarm, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, SiteFarm, this is no commercial product. We're not selling this. This is just what we call our service to the campus. So this is our web platform service. It runs on Drupal, of course. It's currently at 686 live Drupal websites, plus several hundred more that are, clone sites or development sites, or other sites people are working on. And so we're going to tell you about our robots. We're going to tell you what we've kind of put together and the idea of DevOps to really make us more productive, and to make it so that we can handle a pretty large code base at this point, and handle lots of websites for lots of departments on campus. This is kind of a companion presentation to another one that we did at Bad Camp in 2019. There's a video of it called "Make the Robots Do It," and so this is more of a this other video presentation is more of an overview for kind of DevOps in general. We go into a lot more specifics in this presentation we're about to give, and we'll show you some code and really dig in. But if you have other colleagues that kind of want an overview of different places where you can automate things, then show them this. So we're going to kind of go over these different levels of from local development all the way to production. I loved what I think Matt, I'm sorry, I forgot the gentleman's name that said it's not just like QA, it's like from local development all the way through. What are the places where we can make it make us more effective in doing our work, and to eliminate problems, eliminate user errors, eliminate bugs, stuff like that. So there's sort of a workflow that we have here, right? And so anytime you see an arrow show up here, this is where things, if we can automate things, then we'll be better, right? So your local development, it goes all the way through, and then for Bitbucket is where we're storing our code, and this is code sort of flowing upstream, going to Bitbucket, doing our testing and code review, kind of as the pull request process in Bitbucket, going into our staging or user acceptance testing service, and then into production. And kind of similarly, if you've seen an old diagram where now you have the data, right? So you have the database and the files, and that sort of flows downstream. That goes to the staging and user acceptance, but then also all the way down to the local development too, because we want to be able to see the site's data as we brought into the local, make sure that it's working that way too. So we're going to look at each of those steps along the way, and we'll show the kind of stuff that we do in those steps. Local development tools, we use Doxel. Lando's also great. DDev's also great. Really, these modern development tools allows us, to spin up these Docker environments on our local, and it's really made things a lot easier. We use PHP Storm. Again, it doesn't really matter. VS Code is fine, or others. We use Pattern Lab, and Mark's going to get into a little bit of Pattern Lab and how we do our front-end development in just a minute here. And then, SQL Pro is just one of those things. It's nice to be able to see the database itself. And we have a lot of tooling that we have that sort of, we have a lot of tooling that puts this stuff together, right? And we'll show you some of that, some of the Doxel scripts that we've written in order to do that. So Mark, why don't you take it away? And I guess just let me know when you want to progress the slides here.
Sure, or use your best guess.
Sure.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here this morning, or I guess afternoon for you guys, morning for me on the West Coast. But yeah, so for our front end developers, oftentimes we try and build things outside of Drupal. So we use a tool called Pattern Lab. It's been around for quite a while. There's other stuff out there like Fractal and Storybook and whatnot. But the whole idea is we want to build things in isolation as sort of pure CSS, JavaScript before it ends up into our Drupal world. Theoretically, then, anyone else on campus could use it for WordPress or, a React app or whatever else they wanted. But so we've got a place where all of our official branding is centralized. The downside is oftentimes we need a lot of tooling to make front end stuff work, compiling Sass, running modern JavaScript through Babel so that it works for older browsers and all this sort of stuff. So I'm going to take you through kind of our workflow here as far as getting our theme side of things put together. If you're not a front end person, that's totally okay. We're just sort of showing you the tooling for how we move things along. So the first stage is NPM, Node Package Manager. And with NPM, what we did is we created a package. By the way, it's similar to like PHP's Composer. So NPM is just a packaging tool. So NPM, we built a package that sort of centralized all of the processes that need to happen, such as compiling our Sass and all this sort of stuff. So that's in a repository. Shawn, you can hit the next button there.
That one.
There you go. And then moving on. So our UCD Theme Tasks, this is basically a package that has all of our gulp and Webpack configuration. Now, the asterisk there is we're about to replace all of that with a more modern tool, Gulp, Grunt, Webpack, Rollup, all of these. They were trying to solve a problem from once upon a time. There are way better tools now, such as Snowpack or Vite. Most likely, we're going to be centralizing on Snowpack. But you can check out this repository. There's a link for it here. And the whole idea is whether it's our Pattern Lab, our Drupal theme, or a sub theme that someone else on campus is using, they can pull in this NPM package and have everything standardized and ready to go. So within this package, our primary tasks are Gulp, Gulp compile, Gulp validate. And so Gulp, it basically runs Gulp compile, but then also watches for changes, does live reloading so that as a person's writing CSS or JavaScript, it's updating their browser in real time so they don't have to constantly spam the refresh button. Validate is basically linting, making sure that all of their code is up to standards. The next is we have some site building tasks, and these are more for when you're getting started. So let's say someone's firing up a brand new site, they can run the Gulp new site, and this will basically pull in all of the configuration files that like a ESLint file, for example, if they want to override some of that configuration. And then there's a Gulp theme sync, and this actually syncs up all of our CSS and JavaScript and whatnot from our Pattern Lab into our website theme or specifically our Drupal theme. Next, moving on from this, is Pattern Lab. So Pattern Labs where we kind of have our first stage of front-end development. And we kind of simplify all of those Gulp tasks into NPM scripts. People can still use the Gulp tasks directly, but we try and simplify them. So this way, if we ever change Gulp tasks or whatnot, they don't have to go and relearn all this stuff. Everything is specific to their environment. So this is kind of just a straight mapping. So NPM start is like running Gulp. Run build is like running gulp compile. Lint is gulp validate. And then there's some extra ones. EDE is our end-to-end test. So we use Cypress. If you've never used Cypress, it's awesome. It's basically end-to-end testing that does not use Selenium. So it runs directly within Chrome browser. They now support some other browsers. Originally, it was just Chrome. But for a new developer getting started, they just need to clone the repo, run npm CI to install all the node dependencies, run npm start, and then they're ready to go. So anyone pulling our pattern lab, they only need to know really 2 commands. So all that other stuff is sort of hidden away. Next,
that should be nice too. When we move over to something else like Webpack, we can just use the same commands. Is that
yeah,
right, Mark?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, Snowpack, right?
Yeah. So you're going to notice, and I'll hit this later, is you're going to notice there's a lot of sort of nesting of commands into other commands, which might seem a little bit ridiculous at first, but we'll touch on that a little bit. So yeah, testing pattern lab. This is where we get into Cypress. The first thing we do is we run our linting to validate all of our CSS and JavaScript, and then we run Cypress. In addition to that, we also run accessibility tests as part of Cypress. So being part of a university, and hopefully everybody would try and keep things as accessible as possible, but it's especially a big part of our university culture. So we run accessibility tests, make sure things like color contrasts are correct and all that sort of stuff. So I've got a quick demo here. And by the way, there's going to be kind of some flashing lights. If you're sensitive to that, just be aware. And then I don't know what'll actually come across on Zoom, but so basically we can run all the tests at once or one at a time. And this is just going to rip through all of our interactive components within Pattern Lab. So on the right side, you're seeing Pattern Lab actually going through each of the components. On the left side is the list of all the tests that are passing. And when it's done here in just another second, it'll have validated that everything is working as it should. And this has saved our behind so many times. You change one thing and it breaks 12 others, and you realize, whoops. So man, this has been an invaluable tool. I highly recommend automated testing, whether it's unit testing, integration testing, whatever. Do testing, it'll save your behinds. So next slide here. This is the way we wire up our Bitbucket. And again, it doesn't matter whether this is GitLab, GitHub, Circle CI, Probo, whatever it is. We're at DevOps, so you guys are familiar with this. We're using Bitbucket Pipelines to test all this. Basically, we pull in our Docker image from Cypress's official images. Then we run our scripts. Again, these are npm scripts. So CI is similar to npm install, but it's more for within a continuous integration. It basically looks only at the lock file. And so it's way, way faster. It's not trying to figure out all your dependencies in real time. So yeah, then we lint it and we build all of it. And then we run our end-to-end tests. We disable the video because we don't care about the videos at this point. And then we move on. So once we're done with that and everything is passed and it's good to go, then we deploy it to AWS. And so again, we pull in a Docker image that kind of has all the AWS stuff built out. We change into the public directory that Pattern Lab created. We have to make sure we have all of our environment variables set up within Bitbucket. But then we just use the AWS command to sync it up to AWS. And so what happens is we actually, for every pull request, it fires up a new AWS instance. So people can always see and review things in real time. I guess real time is not the right word, but someone does a pull request and immediately you can go and review everything without having to fire it up on your local. So super, super convenient. And moving on. So once we've sort of built everything front end in Pattern Lab, then we pull it into Siteform. And so Siteform, this is where we get into our actual theme development. At this point, we have yet another layer of commands. And I'll get into this in a minute, like I said, with all this nesting. But we use Doxel. Whether you use Doxel, Lando, DDev, all these tools are great. But we're using Doxel specifically. So their command is fin. And we can initialize everything. What this does is it does our theme install, it builds everything. The theme install command runs those npm CI commands. The build, same thing, compiles all the assets. Watch, same thing, watches all the assets for changes things in real time. And the theme sync synchronizes everything from Pattern Lab into the theme. Okay, so this whole like theme Matryoshka doll is a little weird at first, but the whole idea behind it is that by the time you get into Drupal, we've got developers that don't know anything about our front end chain. They're not doing any front end work. They don't care about it. So why do they have to learn npm commands? Why do they have to learn gulp commands? They don't need to. Everything has been mapped into Doxel commands. So all they need to know is their Doxel commands. The Doxel commands call the npm commands, which are inside Pattern Lab. So all the front end people, they know the npm commands, no problem. And then the low level tooling, which really no one needs to know, are all the gulp commands, but that's what sort of powers it all underneath the scenes. So the idea is that again, as we're about to switch out a lot of our tooling and gulp is just going to completely go away, it's not going to really affect anything because no one's using those commands directly. All of that infrastructure is sort of hidden away. So that's it for our theming stuff. And I'll turn it back over to Shawn.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the Drupal side. Mark is our genius on the front end side, so I'm going to talk about when we actually do the Drupal side. So when we build Siteform is a Drupal install profile. The theme is inside of that now. We just recently moved it in there instead of a separate repo, but the theme's inside of that, and so we have a lot of tooling to put this all together. Again, we're talking about Doxel, as Mark said, fin init. He mentioned that one. Fin reinstall. So this will, when we're developing our distro, we sort of develop first for a fresh install because new sites are being spun up all the time on this distro, and so it basically does drush site install, but a few other things there that makes it nice. Refresh. And again, this is sort of different. Refresh can refresh a database with a fresh dump from a live database. Fin bhat and bhl runs our bhat test. Bhl is sort of our shorthand because we tag bhat test with @local if it's something we're working on actively. Our bhat tests take like, I don't know, 30 minutes to run, so we don't want to run all of them every time, just the one we're working on, and it pops open our screen sharing. PHP unit. And Fin SQL Pro is just an easy way to be able to open the database in the SQL Pro app. So let me show you this fin init as a good example, because this is really the meat of, you download or you clone the repo, and then you got to get it running, right? And for a new developer, this is really helpful. So we copy some environment files. Fin up just starts the containers, and then there's just some configuration setting, some environment variables for the composer limit, and then do a composer install. And notice composer is also a fin command, fin composer, so that composer is actually run within the Docker images. So developers don't necessarily even need to go through the effort of getting Composer installed locally, though it's not that hard. We can also standardize on a version of Composer. There's been a switch sort of from Composer 1 to Composer 2, and so at some point, like, everybody got Composer 2, but it didn't work on our platform, so we had to force people to use the internal one, because we set it up for using Composer 1. And then we switched over to Composer 2, and now everybody's just on Composer 2. So let's continue. I mean, some of this stuff is kind of similar. You've seen this, we're setting up the settings up PHP, the local settings, the local services. Then we're setting, again, the local settings.php in the settings.php config, and we're dropping the database configuration in there as well. So Mark talked about this a little bit. It does this some of the front end setup stuff for the theme install and theme build. Make sure that Node is the right version, and then install the site, right? And so we install the site farm profile, and we do a Drush ULI with the URI so people can get a link right there. And just in case, make sure to set the permissions so it doesn't screw up. So when we do the development of the profile itself, like we have all these different tools that we use for this, right? So Bitbucket, we talked about. We use Provo CI for our automated testing, and Provo CI is great because it also creates an environment that is persistent. So we have a link directly to the environment so that people who aren't developers can QA the feature that we're working on. I mentioned before we have Bhat and PHP unit. So here's sort of what it looks like when we have a pull request. And actually, in the time since I've made this slide, they've actually changed the user interface. So you can select the new user interface, or I think you can still use the old one. In any case, this is what it looks like. And so we can set up reviewers, which is nice, so they know that it's their job to kind of take a look at it. The little check mark means we have one. Somebody approved it. We can have a comment thread about, hey, is this the right way to do this? How do we, can you remind me of the exact situation that this is solving so I can properly test it if it's not obvious, right? Here's the test that passed, so it lists all of the Provo tests that go there and say, yep, we all passed. And then we merge it. Okay, so this is all done using Composer. So we have a lot of repos to kind of put all this together. So we have something called Sitefarm Acquia. So we host Sitefarm in Acquia Site Factory. Names are similar, I know. So, but we have a repo called Sitefarm Acquia, and this is the base repo for we call this the distro, right? So this is the main Composer JSON file, Composer lock file, and then some other tooling around specific to Acquia. So if there's any, and then we have Sitefarm, the profile. So profile is actually in a separate repo. The reason we do that is that we also have Sitefarm deployed on a couple sites on Pantheon as well. So we want to be able to use the same profile both on Acquia and Pantheon. So Sitefarm Acquia has, Composer require UC Davis Sitefarm. And then Sitefarm has a bunch of Composer required Drupal, lots of modules, right? Lots and lots of modules. However, we also have a few modules and for specific to Acquia in Sitefarm Acquia, there's a Drupal ACSF module, which is the Acquia Site Factory module that is sort of the secret sauce under the hood that makes it work. But the Sitefarm Acquia is also where we list the version number of Drupal that we're using. So Composer require core recommended like 8.9 is what we're on right now, right? And then we have Pattern Lab, and so Pattern Lab gets brought into Sitefarm, the theme in the Sitefarm profile, like Mark was describing earlier. I'm going to ignore that right now because that actually is done locally. It's not done through our CI tool or our build. So Mark described that already, and I'm just going to sort of let that be. But let's look at these things right now and show how we do the build using all these different repos. So let's pretend we have Composer requires Sitefarm dev 8x, and so there's 8x, and now we have a new pull request. We have a pull request from feature 42, and we want to pull request that into dev. Okay, so when we're testing, we want to make sure we're testing the same thing on both the repo for the distro and the repo for the profile. And so basically how we need to do this is there might be pull requests on both of them, right? Because we might need to add a module or make some change to the profile, I mean to the distro, and have a matching change to the profile that maybe implements that module in certain ways. And so here's some of the code that we have, and this is what we do in Probo, where we actually make an API request and we try to pull in the destination branch of the pull request. Like, okay, this is from the feature 42 into dev, and say, does that exist? Okay, that exists. And then we say, hey, is there a branch that's exactly the same branch name as the feature? So is there a feature 42? Then we'll use it. If not, we'll use the destination branch. And if there's neither of those, then we'll use dev. So we have to use this logic. Otherwise, sometimes the composer won't build or something if it's using, the main branch, but we're working on the dev branch. And then we require the right branch. So this would be if we have a pull request for the distro, right, for Sitefarm Acquia, and we need to make sure that we're pulling in the right branch of the profile. It gets a little more complicated with the profile if we have a pull request in the profile, because you don't actually run composer require or composer update on the profile. You have to do it on the distro. So we kind of do the same thing. We look for the same destination branch in the distro, and then we look for the we look for the current branch, and if it exists, we'll use if it exists, we'll use that. If not, we'll use the destination branch. Then we do some weird stuff here where we actually clone out the distro, and then we move into it, and then we copy the profile to a separate folder, and then do a require on that particular folder. Like, we actually create that as its own Git repo on Probo, on the CI tool, and then we change the location and using that patch that goes to the local on the CI tool, and then bring that in. So it's a little convoluted, but with this, we're able to get the same version of, or the same branch of the profile and the distro together. The actual build for sending this out to Acquia is way simpler, because once we get the distro, we can push that distro branch, and then all we got to do is a composer install, because the lock file is already done, already in place. So it does a composer install, and then because it's Site Factory, we have there's this drush command that needs to be run to kind of set up this ACSF, initialize that environment. Kind of cool thing that Acquia Pipelines does is that it actually allows us, you're gonna shriek until I tell you what actually is going on here. It allows us to store the SSH keys in the code. What? No? Yes, but it's actually encrypted. So this pipelines tool has a method for encrypting these private keys, and so that you can store them in your Git repo, and they're not raw keys. They're encrypted, and Acquia knows how to decrypt them. Only Acquia knows how to decrypt them on their own platform. So that's a really convenient way of being able to store these keys. Oh, I was going to step through it. Okay. And then on Acquia Site Factory, we have the staging server. So Site Factory gives us a dev, a test, and a live environment, and it makes it really easy to deploy the test environment. And we can select what sites we want to go. Like I said, we have 686 sites. We don't need to deploy all, and actually even more than that if you include all the dev and other not live sites. We have about 1,250 sites. So there's no reason to copy 1,250 database and files directory over to the test environment. Most of these sites are cookie cutter sites, but we do have some sites that have some customization on them. And so there's a UI tool within Site Factory to just deploy these, the specific sites that we really want to move over and take a really close look at. We also have some visual regression testing that we do. So after we deploy all the stuff to the test environment, or in a test called it's called test. It's really our QA environment. It's the last step right before we go live. We use this this tool called Backstop Js, and it takes screenshots of the test environment and the live environment and compares the two, and then has this kind of neat you can watch this little GIF here of it doing this scrubbing where you can say, okay, what's changed? In this case, what's changed is actually in the time that I deployed the test environment, a new article has been published, or site launch, right? So we list sites that are launched, and so this is actually a change that it's called a failure, but it's not really a failure, right? This is what we expect to see. So but it allows them to see if our customers on campus have created a sub theme, or if they've made some changes, they can make sure to that the changes that we're making isn't going to screw them up, and they have a little bit of time. We usually give them about a week to look at this stuff, to look at their site and make sure that that things are okay, and to tell us if they identified any bugs that we didn't. Which has happened, but not that frequently. Our automated tests, work pretty well. I have a question here that says, when you have a failure on Backstop, does that result in a failed build in Bitbucket Pipelines? No, because this happens after the deploy to the site factory test environment. This is just a convenience, and what this does is this actually publishes, much like we do with Pattern Lab, publishes to an S3 bucket that has hosting turned on. So this is just something where we can tell all of our customers on campus, hey, go here and find your site and just look at these screenshots, and allows us to sort of look at a bunch of sites all at once. But these failures aren't really, sometimes they're meant to be. We make visual changes from time to time, because remember what the screenshot is, I look at live and I look at test. Well, maybe test has, we made an improvement in the layout a little bit. Now everything's shifted slightly, but it's supposed to be like that. So that's what that's all about. Good question, James. Thanks. And so this is what it looks like. And it says, how many passed and how many failed. And then the deployment to production. And let me tell you, when we have 1,250 websites that I need to run update.php on all at the same time, being able to have this one screen to do it is really, really nice. Particularly being able to schedule it. We use change management in our ITIL process at UC Davis. So, we have an open change window that's scheduled out, several days in advance or a week in advance. And so I can drop that directly into this start time at a specific time, excuse me. And then we select the path, or in this case, the tag that we're going to deploy. And we say, is this a hot fix? It's just code, or are we going to do code and databases here? And then check the box that says, yes, I'm sure, and update. And then it runs, for, I think this runs for about 4 or 5 hours now for us. Holy cow, it just takes a long time. But it does a slow thing where it takes 3 sites at a time and it updates them and then moves on to the next 3 sites. And it doesn't have downtime during it. We also have Fastly in place, so that keeps the sites, even though it goes into maintenance mode for a very brief period while update.php runs and then switches back. Fastly keeps the sites up for anonymous users very nicely. And that's it. We got through that in about a little over half an hour, so we have some time for questions. Do we have any more questions? Let's see. Optimize autoloader in the config instead of composer JSON. I'm not familiar with that. Mark, do you want to comment on that?
Oh, I was replying to the previous comment.
Okay. Oh, okay. I see. There it is. Folks might be interested in the optimize autoloader option at the production composer install command. Okay, I will look at that.
Hey,
I don't see any other questions here.
Can you go back to the slide where you're looking at the deployed production?
Yeah.
Yeah, when what are you doing when you say code only and code and database?
So that's telling Site Factory whether it needs to run update.php on all the sites or not. And so, sometimes if it's a quick Drupal security fix that's just a code fix and we don't need to run update.php, it'll run the code only and it'll go through relatively quickly, like within less than an hour, really. I mean, because it doesn't need to go and cycle through every single site and run update.php on every single site. Site Factory is a multi-site environment. And so it's a single code base sitting there with 1,200 databases and 1,200 folders for files, more than that because private files are in a separate folder. Anyway, so there's lots of database stuff there, which if we need to run update.php on every site, it's got to cycle through and do those a little bit at a time. It doesn't have the bandwidth to be able to do 1,200 update.phps all at once. The server would come to a grinding halt. So if it's a quick thing, we can do code only. But code and databases means we've got to run all the updates.
Right. And then you had the Backstop JS slide.
Right.
And where are you putting these? These are just artifacts that are generated?
Right. So what this does, this uses Bitbucket Pipelines to run the Backstop JS inside of a container. And then Backstop creates like a static website, right, with a index.html file. And then that's where you can go and view all this stuff. And that's what this looks like, right? So you can see all the screenshots, the reference, which is live, and then the test one. It says how many are passed, how many have failed, which means it's gone beyond whatever your threshold is. And so that website, you can run that locally too if you want to just see what it is. But what we do within Bitbucket Pipelines is generate that static HTML and package it and send it off to an S3 bucket that's got web hosting turned on. And so we publish that. I mean, if you want to see it, it's at testgroup.sitefarm.ucdavis.edu is an example of what you can see. And it's just static HTML hosted on S3 so that our test group is what we call the people who have created sub themes, or those are the ones that we send to our test environment on Site Factory, so that they can go and really view their site. They can tell us, when they request to be in the test group, which sites do you want and which pages on your site do you want to have as part of our visual regression, and we'll just add them to the list, so they can go and see the scrubber on their individual file, on their individual pages.
So they notify you on what pages to monitor, and then you monitor them, or how does that workflow work?
So we are very distributed at UC Davis, and so we don't have the staff to actually create 600 websites. So most of that is done by campus departments. Campus department IT and communication staff have access to Site Factory. They can spin up sites whenever they want. They can add domains to sites. All they have to do is request a domain from our host clerk, and then add it in Site Factory, and then their site is live. I mean, we have sites go live all the time that we know nothing about, and so and they can add their own theme, and so they might be doing all this stuff without even telling us. So if they want to be part of our test group, they can request to be part of our test group, but they got to tell us which site they want to look at, and they got to tell us which pages we want to do the visual regression. Like, we'll do the home page by default for everybody, but maybe they've created a custom content type, or maybe this is the page they did some extra theming around, some extra CSS to make things look nice, and so maybe that's the page they want to tell us is the one we should be part of the visual regression testing.
How do they tell you? Did they just put a file in their repo or something, or do
No. We have a web form on our site, on the Site Farm site, that says request to be part of the test group, and it's name, website, what pages do you want, any other people you want on, and then we send out an email a week ahead of time saying, okay, the test environment is ready, everybody go check out your test sites, and they all know that they can log into Site Factory on the test environment, They can create a new branch of their theme, which we're going through a redesign right now, and so they're going to need to create a new branch of their sub theme to address any changes to based on our base theme that we're deploying out there. And so we wish they were a little more engaged. Sometimes they just kind of they have other work to do, so they don't pay attention, and that's bit them and us in the past before. But we give them the opportunity to check out their site before we go live.
Yeah.
Do you want me
to say something?
Sorry,
I was going to say, do you want me to cover? There's a question about the pattern lab and copying assets. I can touch that real quick.
You want me to go back to a slide?
Yeah, or you want me to share my screen real quick and I can just show it?
Sure.
I don't know if I'm allowed to share my screen here, but. All right, can you guys see my code?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, cool. So one thing, we do not copy templates. So I know a lot of people doing Pattern Lab stuff, they do Pattern Lab Twig and they try and have everything as all in one. We avoid that because it just complicates everything. So we just do basically CSS and JavaScript, more specifically Sass. We found it's really simple to just write our templates in Twig once it's already in Drupal. So this way our pattern lab is pure HTML. Yeah, it really hasn't slowed us down at all, and it's kept everything real simple. But our theme sync command in Doxel, basically we CD into the theme. We find out what branch. By default, it'll use our redesign branch because we're currently redesigning things. Otherwise, you can pass into this command whatever branch you want to sync from our pattern lab. If there's a leftover folder from the previous sync leftover, it'll get rid of that. And then it just clones. It'll clone our pattern lab into a temporary folder, and then it runs our npm theme sync. And so that will pull in all of the JavaScript, the Sass, images, fonts, and whatnot. So those then go into specific folders. Where am I at here? So JavaScript, it'll put the JavaScript into a pattern lab folder. Same thing with the Sass, it'll put in a pattern lab folder. So basically our people know, don't ever touch anything in these because it'll get wiped out the next time we sync things up. But then we allow people to override, because for example, the toolbar in Drupal, that doesn't exist in our pattern lab because that's very much a Drupal specific thing. Our pattern lab has nothing to do with Drupal. So again, if someone wants to use it in a static site, a WordPress site, they can do that. But occasionally there are specific things like, I don't know, like the quick edit. We need one little tweak with the quick edit. So that's what these other layers are for. But these are used very sparingly. You can see there's very little code in this file. I would say 99% of stuff is in our pattern lab. So this pulls over, the JavaScript pulls over, images pull over. What doesn't pull over are the actual templates. But that's not been an issue for us. So.
What are we using for templating right now, Mark?
Still Twig. Or do you mean in Pattern Lab?
In Pattern Lab, yeah.
In Pattern Lab, handlebars is the default. Once upon a time, it was mustache. Handlebars, it's basically the same thing. Handlebars, Twig, they're all kind of similar syntax. But handlebars is significantly simpler and it's JavaScript based.
We had this grand idea that everybody on campus would just use our pattern lab instead of trying to make their own designs, because we have a design from Strategic Communications. And so we wanted to make it as simple as possible and not require people to use PHP if they're, turn up their nose at PHP for whatever reason. And so just use plain JavaScript to create our pattern lab.
I have one question. You had a mention of, you had a reference to deploy to AWS. What are you deploying to AWS besides to S3? Is there anything else that you're deploying to AWS?
No, well, not in relation to this. We have lots of AWS stuff around campus, but for this, all we're deploying to AWS is the artifacts, the static HTML output from Pattern Lab, and then the Backstop Js. We do, I mean, it's not part of our automated process. We do a few other things, like we host our fonts in similarly in AWS S3 with CloudFront. We're required to put CORS rules in front of it and stuff like that. So
yeah, but you're not using Kubernetes, or you're not deploying sites or anything like that on ECS or anything
that's
like
what we
that.
pay Acquia large sums of money for, and I'm not sure how they're doing it.
Yeah,
I know it's
okay.
on AWS too, but
Right.
we pay them to do that.
Right, gotcha. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been an
This is
honor.
great.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
this is awesome. Thank you for this great presentation. This is a lot of details.